My name is Joe Strout with Luminary Apps and Strout & Sons. Today I want to show how to use Unity events in the way that nature intended. In fact, I'm going to recreate a live training tutorial from Unity which used Unity events in a funny way. And I think you'll see that by using them to their full potential, we can eliminate a whole lot of code and build a project very quickly. So let's get started. I have here just the very beginnings of a project. I'm going to build most of it as we go, but I'm not going to make you watch me type code or assemble game objects. In this project we're going to create a bunch of little minion guys. They look like this. A minion is just a capsule with a cube for shades, and then there's a sphere collider on it. There's also an audio source attached which has a sort of scream sound, and this is useful because the point of this demo is to make a whole bunch of little minions and then make them scream and pop, kind of like Lemmings in the classic Lemmings game. So that's my minion. He hasn't got any code on him at all. If I run this, you can see it doesn't do anything, except I had an explosion prefab still hanging around. This is my explosion prefab. Nothing terribly fancy going on here. The only thing at all noteworthy is that I've attached a script called the particle auto destroy script, which is not the point of my demo, but since it is a frequently asked question on the net, I'll quickly go over it. This is just a script you can attach to anything with the particle system, and after that particle system is played and is no longer alive, it destroys the game object. So this is a handy way to get an explosion that will play once, and then if you watch the hierarchy, once the explosion's done, the object goes away. So that'll be handy in a minute. Let's get that out of our scene. Nothing up my sleeve. Main camera has no scripts on it. Neither does directional light or the ground. These are all just basic Unity objects. So let's get started. The first thing we want to do is, well, our first goal is to make it so that when you press a key, a whole bunch of minions are spawned. But before we get that far, let's talk a little bit about Unity events. A Unity event is an object that you can hook up listeners to do almost anything. It can invoke any public method on any object. It can set public properties. So it can do things like play sounds, or enable or disable a game object, or it can invoke any method on a script you might write. So the way to use Unity events to their full potential is to have little scripts that just do one job, which can be triggered via a public method, and then you hook that up to a Unity event. So for example, I have a script here called logger. Alright, this actually does 3 jobs, but it's all logging. It can do a debug log, or it can log warning, or it can log error. And these are all public methods. And the reason we need this at all is because one thing a Unity event can't do, at least not within the editor, is invoke a static method. And debug.log is a static method. So I've just wrapped each of those debug methods in a regular mono behavior class, and then we can attach that to something and invoke it from a Unity event. Attach it to what? Sometimes I put my logger script on the main camera, but that's a little hackish. So what I'm going to do here is create an object whose job it is to manage all these minions, and it'll also do debug things for us like logging. So I'm going to call this minion manager, and then we're going to add the logger component to that. Now we need something to invoke the events, and invoking an event is really easy. Again, I'm not going to make you watch me type, but I have the script here called event trigger test. This declares 3 public Unity events, and in order for this to compile, it's important that I add using UnityEngine.events, which you don't get out of the box with the default starter template that comes with Unity. Although I've modified my starter template so that I always have this because they're so darn handy. But once you've done that, then you can declare some public Unity events, and then to invoke them, you simply call the name of your Unity event object .invoke. And you can see here on Q, I'm invoking test event. YQ, I don't know, that's what Adam did in his original tutorial that I'm sort of recreating here. And then O, when you press O, we're going to invoke this spawn minions event, and when P is pressed, we'll invoke destroy all. So that is all there is to that script. It's very simple. And this event trigger test, I could attach it anywhere. I could put it on my minion manager, and that would make sense. But just to show that Unity events don't have to be on the same object, I'm going to stick this on the camera. So the camera now is running this event trigger test, but these events aren't hooked up to anything. You can see that these lists are empty. So how do you hook it up? I'm not going to write any code for this. One of the amazing and wonderful things about Unity events is that you can hook them up entirely within the Unity IDE. You just find an object that has a public Unity event. It appears in the inspector. Click the little plus button, and then drag on the object that you want to respond to that event. I've dragged on Minion Manager, and now there's all these different things I could do. I could change its layer, I could change its name or its tag, I could do a send message. I can change things about its transform. I could make it look at something else. Or I can go to my logger component, which again has all of the standard mono behavior stuff plus my log methods. These are the public methods I added to that script. So I'm going to say log, and we will log, and here I get to specify a parameter right within the inspector. I can log anything I want because that logger.log method takes a string parameter. And the Unity inspector knows this. So we're going to log this as a test. Now when I run, that script is on my camera. It should be listening. If I press the Q key, you can see down here, this is a test. Well, alright. So there we go. That's working. So, what's the next step? Next we want to spawn a bunch of minions. Now, the script for this spawning is a little complex, and this is again from the original tutorial. I haven't done much except if you look at the script in the original tutorial, there was a whole bunch of extra code in here to add and remove and manage events based on this string-based event listener system that he had constructed. We don't need any of that. The only thing I've changed is that the spawn method is now public, because we're going to invoke that from an event. And what does this spawn method do? Well, it iterates up to spawn count, it finds a good position to spawn something, and then it spawns it. The other thing, I've made some other minor changes, such as I put all of the minions inside the object that has the spawner script, just to keep my hierarchy nice and neat. That's not really important, it's just my own personal preference. So that's the spawner script. We're going to add that to our minion manager. It's going to spawn 10 minions within a 25-meter radius, each offset by 1, I guess. Oh, and it needs the minion prefab, so let's give it the minion prefab. There we go. Now, that doesn't do anything until something calls that public void spawn method. What's going to call it? Do I have to go write some code and hook up events and use magic strings? No. Instead, all I have to do is go to my event trigger test. Here's the spawn minions event. I add a listener, say minion manager, and I want it to spawn. And because I can, I'm going to add a second listener, also in the minion manager, to do some logging. And this is an important point. One Unity event can have any number of listeners. It's a one-to-many relationship. So here we're going to invoke spawn, and then we're going to invoke log, and we'll say more minions. Minions. There we go. Now let's run. When we press the O key, that event will be invoked. And look, we get a bunch of minions, as well as the more minions appearing in our console log. So that's really cool, and it was super easy. Next, let's make these things destroy themselves. When I press the P key, P for pop, I guess, the destroy all event is being invoked. Now nothing's hooked up to the destroy all event, and you can see that's okay. You don't get a nil reference exception. There's no error that happens if you invoke an event that has no listeners. So that's all right. We could just for fun, add some logging here as well. And it's not just for fun. It's actually a great way when you're first experimenting with your events to make sure that they're being invoked when you think they're being invoked. So I'm going to do a log here. We'll log, oh no, which if any of you remember Lemmings, you'll get the joke. If not, that's okay. So now I can spawn some minions, press the P key. It says, oh no, but nothing else happens. Now here we have a bit of a poser, because there are potentially many minions. They're instantiated at runtime from a prefab. So I can't just hook a prefab up as the recipient of this event. Well, it thinks I can, but I don't think this is going to actually work. But I tell you what, we're going to come back and try that. But first, let's go to our minion and add the self-destruct script. And I'll walk you through that as well. Again, this is mostly not my code. This is from the original demo. But I've taken out a whole bunch of stuff related to managing events that was in the original code. Now, you'll see I'm going to put some of that back in a slightly different form. But let's look at what we've got for now. This is the entire file. It's one page of code. And actually, we're going to add one more thing. We'll add a public void destroy function which starts a coroutine. Destroy now. And then that destroy now coroutine waits a small random amount of time, plays the scream with a random pitch, does a little shake, and then instantiates the explosion effect and finally destroys this game object. So this is more or less your basic destroy me script, and we're going to attach that, we have attached that to the minion. It's not going to do anything until we invoke that destroy method though. So now we're going to try just hooking this up directly on the prefab. I don't think this is going to work, but let's see what happens. I'm a little surprised it let me do that. So self-destruct destroy should get triggered when we press the P key. Spawn some, press P. Yeah. Coroutine couldn't be started because the game object minion is inactive. So what it's saying here, my attempt failed because I've hooked this event up to the prefab itself, not to the instances of the prefab. Prefabs are not active and you can't start a coroutine on an inactive object, so that's no good. Let's take that right back out of there. So what we have here is more of a many-to-many relationship. We've got the destroy all trigger from the main camera needs to invoke the listener on lots of different events. Lots of different objects, which are instantiated at runtime. So in that case, we have to hook up the listener at runtime. We can't do it at in the inspector here. Now, Unity events are not nearly so revolutionary when you're hooking them up in code. You could just as well use C# events, for example, or your own homegrown event notification system as in the original tutorial. But they're still pretty cool because whether listeners are added at runtime or added in the inspectors, what's called a persistent listener, it's invoked the exact same way, and you can mix and match the two. So they're still good to use even when you're hooking them up at runtime. So let's add some code to the self-destruct script here. Now again, I'm not going to make you watch me type. I'm going to paste in some code I've prepared earlier, and then I'll explain it. So we're adding here a static Unity event called destroy event. So even though there may be many self-destruct instances in the scene, there's only one destroy event that everyone can get to just by prefixing it with the name of the class, and that's significant. This is the event that will be invoked, and then what are the listeners? Well, each of the instances are going to add themselves as a listener, and we'll do that in onEnable, which gets called when the object is created, and also if it were to be disabled and then re-enabled later, it would get called again. Now, this adds a runtime listener, not a persistent listener, and these are two different things. A persistent listener added over here, in the inspector, those are weak references. You don't have to worry about the target object going away. If it goes away, the listener just gets automatically removed from the event, which is fantastic. A runtime listener, not so clever. These you have to remove yourself. So, in onEnable, we add the listener, and then in onDisable, we'll remove the listener. So that if the object were to be disabled or destroyed for whatever reason, we'll no longer be listening for that event. And then in the destroy method, I pasted too much. In the destroy method, we will also stop listening for the event because destruction, in this case, takes a while. It takes several seconds as it screams and shakes and does all of its fancy stuff. And we don't want to respond to the destroy event again while all that is going on, so we just remove ourselves right away. Notice that it's fine to remove yourself twice. It doesn't cause an error, it doesn't spew warnings to your console. Remove listener simply does nothing if there isn't such a listener found. So now we have this global event, and we have all of the instances automatically adding and removing themselves. How do we invoke that event? A static Unity event doesn't appear in the inspector, so there's no easy way to hook up to it that way. So we're going to make ourselves a helper method called destructTrigger. And here you can see I've got an empty mono behavior. I've deleted the standard start and update because we don't need any of that. All we need here is a public method which invokes that static event. So here's a public method, public void destroy, and it invokes self-destruct destroy event. This is a pattern I call relay, where you have a public method on an object whose primary or sole purpose is to invoke some event. It relays that event, and the benefit of this is we can add destructTrigger. Since it's a mono behavior, we can add it to an object in the scene, and then we can hook that event up through the UI. So that's exactly what we're going to do. Here's our minion manager. We're going to add a destructTrigger to it. Now it has a destructTrigger, and going into our event trigger test, we can add that as a listener. Grab our minion manager, invoke the destructTrigger, destroy, and now let's see how we're doing. We'll spawn some minions, and then we'll press the P key. Oh no! Okay, that wasn't nearly as exciting as it should be because where's my explosion? This is not really the point of the demo, but let's get it right. Self-destruct doesn't have its explosion prefab, so let's hook that up. Forgot to do that. Spawn, 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 self-destruct. There they go. Pop. Lots of fun. And this time I'll hit self-destruct again while they're being destroyed. Hit the P key, P, 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 nothing's happening. Because we were clever enough to remove the listener as soon as we get that destroy event. So everything's working great. I can do this all day, and it really is surprisingly fun. So that's Unity events. The takeaway message is, let's see, if you make a public Unity event property on a mono behavior, then you can hook it up at runtime, like these. And you can hook them up to multiple things. You don't have to write any code. The only time you do have to write code is if you're hooking up events at runtime rather than in the IDE. Those are a little bit different, and in that case you want to remember to remove the listener when you're done with it. That's all there is to it. They're super powerful. So I encourage you to go out, write lots of little scripts that do a single job, and they have either a public method that can be invoked from an event, or they have a public Unity event when something interesting happens that allows you to tie other things into it. It's a super powerful method, and in my opinion, it's the most important feature that was added to Unity 4.6, so I hope everyone starts using it. Thanks for listening.